Millions are dead or infected, with billions more to join them. A miasma of chaos and rot is spreading into every church, every factory, every home. To fight and take back what is ours, there is only one solution. With them being reborn in the image of the one true God Emperor of mankind, 8 feet tall, strong, fast, durable, and equipped with swords built to rip and tear if their bolters haven't turned the target into a fine mist before then. They grant no mercy, they give no ground, and they are busy doing more important things. So it's up to the frail rejects like you and I to bootstrap our way through the ranks and thousands of monsters to save the day. Developed and published by Fatshark, who are best known for their Vermintide duology, Darktide is another objective-based multiplayer horde game, but this time it's set in the 40k version of Warhammer instead of the fantasy one. I've never played any game like this, but with Darktide being set in the cooler Warhammer, I had to try it. To anybody who doesn't know anything about this universe but still has an interest in this game, I'll keep it simple. It is the 41st millennium, and the Imperium of Man, the biggest faction of humans making up a galaxy-spanning theocratic oligarchy worshipping the Emperor. Before getting mortally wounded by a sword of sun to the point of being on indefinite life support through a big chair that runs on souls, he led humanity to new heights of galactic xenophobia thousands of years earlier with his leadership, strength, and renowned psychic ability. Having psychic abilities that draw power from the warp. A psychic dimension existing parallel to our own that feeds off sentient beings' emotions, housing a bunch of evil like the Chaos Gods. Nurgle, Khorne, Slaanesh, Tzeentch. Death, disease, decay, war, murder, rage, pleasure, pain, excess, change, sorcery, feathers. Is a little short on Space Marines. Genetically engineered soldiers given cool weapons and suits developed by Forge Worlds. Entire planets dedicated to the Imperium's needs for manufacturing of technology ran by the Adeptus Mechanicus. A cult that's super into technology to the point of replacing most but not all of themselves to be closer with the Omnissiah. A machine god that supposedly exists in all technology. When it comes to Hive Tertium, a really big city. So they're throwing the outcasts of society who are weak but willing to fix it. For anybody not into Warhammer who got that, have a cookie, you deserve it. And if any of that sounded interesting, I suggest watching Bricky's faction intro videos. They're great launching points. Now if I've learned anything from dipping my toe in the 40k ocean of knowledge, it's these 3 things. Never let a blood raven near anything that's not bolted down, there will always be war, and that war will look really cool. Fatshark took note of all that and it can be seen in their HQ and in the game. On a technical level, it's pretty damn good. Everything looks great on its own, like the disgusting skin textures, the metal-looking metals, all that stuff. Every weapon swing breaks off enemy pieces with bone shards, maggots, and blood covering whatever's nearby. It's the best kind of disgusting. There's so much going on with the particle effects, lighting, and lifeless bodies flying when you're playing the game as intended, with everything going 100 miles an hour, but it all melds into a beautiful symphony of destruction. All of it's impressive, but what really stood out to me was how everything was grimdark to its bones. Anything and everything you lay your eyes on is true to the vision of Games Workshop, and I commend the developers for capturing that. It's filthy and lived in, guns are bulky, there are spikes jutting out of roofs and benches, tubes are everywhere, and CVS receipts are smacked on all this shit for good luck or whatever. It feels so right, even without using the brand's most recognizable icon in a living or undead Space Marine. They don't even use the best factions either. There aren't many zones, but each one is visually distinct from the others, and while the gameplay scope is pretty tight and linear, the visual scope is a lot bigger and conveys one of the themes of 40k, which is insignificance. Everything's grand in scale, making Tertium look and feel like a place capable of sustaining billions. You can look out and see these gigantic high Gothic skyscrapers, which aren't too crazy, but if you look up, the sky not only has metal plates holding up dozens of layers of city, but there's another inverted city hanging off of it. It's like Midgar but horizontally mirrored, 10 times wider and stacked on top with several more Midgars. And as opposed to the other Warhammer games where you're above it all, literally, controlling units, you are in this shit. Boots on the ground with a lasgun and shovel, doing some menial task they'll give to the next sucker if you die trying. You are nothing, you will not be remembered, all hail the Big E. So good on Fatshark for this game's looks, and I'm going to mark it down on the board, my famous scoreboard that I'm known for. 1 point for Darktide for conveying a theme through visuals, and on the other side, 1 point against Darktide for that narrative theme being the best narrative thing in the game. Which is to say, the story. Before getting into the story, crafting, and shop, which all range from insulting to annoying, I have to acknowledge this isn't the type of game you play for the story. I knew it going in, it's not like I was expecting The Last of Us 3 here. I also have to acknowledge that Darktide is supposedly a live service game. So maybe 2 years from now, this game will be the greatest piece of fiction ever thought of by a human. But they're charging money for it now, so I'm judging what's here, now. And this is embarrassing. You make your character, break out of jail, bump into a guard you interacted with earlier, save her, and work together to get to safety. On the Morning Star, you attend a pep rally and Zola tells you to work hard and prove yourself. Then Hadron tells you to work hard and prove yourself. Then Morrow tells you to work hard and prove yourself. Then Rannick tells you to work hard, and you can probably guess where I'm going with this. That template is used several times, and around the 5th one, I just gave up on anything remotely interesting happening. Like the warmth that comes over people when freezing to death. I took comfort in expecting nothing but mediocrity and went into full apathy mode. But on that last cutscene, a fire within me awoke, like a phoenix rising from annoying character design. Your character and this rando are called in front of the interrogator. He says one of you is the traitor and points a gun at you, before revealing the greatest twist in the history of gaming, that the traitor is in fact not you, the protagonist, but whoever the this is. This NPC who never speaks and is in the previous cutscenes for about 10 seconds. She runs away and the game breaks out the organ music and the slow-mo, and after she's dead, Rannick tells you to work hard. So let me get this straight, Fatshark. You do the barest of minimums for everything before this cutscene, and now, at the finish line, you try to bring it all together and have an arc. No. 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 The story fails. Fatshark fails because the story doesn't earn anything. It doesn't earn the fake out, it doesn't earn any tension, it doesn't earn any investment. Because, Fatshark, you didn't set anything of substance up. And shame on them for promoting involvement from Dan Abnett when this is what they come out with. Moving on from the unsatisfactory to the annoying and recently renovated. When you're not in the field or being chewed out for only killing 2,000 poxwalkers instead of 2.5, you're free to explore a small section of the Morningstar. Take in the air, stop by the meat grinder to test out some strats, maybe buy a weapon assuming it's in the shop at all and good enough stat-wise to where it's not a handicap, because if not, you'll have to come back in an hour. Could spend that gold burning a hole in your pocket on some checkerboard sweatpants or a hat for the low cost of And lastly, how about messing around with the crafting system that only took 3 months after release to add? Taking it back a sec, the meat grinder is okay. It does what it's supposed to, but the option to arrange, multiply, and aggro NPCs would be appreciated. The weapon shops are on a clock and refresh after a certain amount of time, with the regular store being every hour and the requisitorium every day. I don't think I've ever liked any time-based shop in any game, ever, and it's not different here. After spending weeks hunting for an RTX that was in stock, I don't want to boot up the game and have to do the same for a decent force staff. Clothes are mostly well priced with the occasional insane ask. My biggest gripe in that department, aside from the clock it runs on, is how samey a lot of it looks, with no radically different designs and about 4 colors in rotation: blue, black, gray, and red. The crafting system is now a thing with 4 ways to work it. Weapons have perks and blessings. Both are buffs, with blessings being more impactful. You can refine, re-rolling a perk, earn blessings, trashing the weapon but keeping one of its blessings, re-bless, taking that stored blessing from before and attaching it to something new, and consecrate, adding a random blessing. While this system is still RNG, it's at least somewhat controllable and you can get what you want eventually. It's functional, and it's fucked up how it took a quarter of a year to be added. There is one aspect of this game that, unlike almost everything else, was there from the very beginning, always ran without a hitch, and was consistently updated. The Premium Store, where you can drop your cash to buy exclusive outfits and accessories. Looking at the Premium Store sets compared to the regular ones, it's night and day. The premium ones have more colors, are more distinct, and in my eye, have more care put into them. It's to the point where whenever I see anything that's unique, I just assume it's paid for, and 99% of the time, it is. None of it affects gameplay to the point of making players better or missions easier, which is at least something. But for me to be fully okay with it, I needed 2 things. 1, some way for a player to earn it without spending a cent, which could be really hard to earn, but that would be fine. And 2, for the unpaid shops to have better stuff, and maybe get updated more than once in a blue moon. Full disclosure, I did buy these 3 items because I have no backbone. Anyway, speaking from my personal experience, I found the game to run mostly well before and after upgrading my PC. At launch there was a lot of hitching, but that just kind of went away. The only recurring issue now is the crashes that would usually happen once every dozen hours or so. Hard crashes too, the type where I have to switch my power supply off and on to get my PC running again. I've heard other people's experiences were mixed at best, so be wary depending on your setup, and always use DLSS or Fidelity FX, because without it it's like playing a PowerPoint presentation. Character creation is pretty solid, with a surprising amount of stuff to pick from when it comes to the backstory of your character. Before creating the look, you create a history, picking a homeworld, childhood, defining moment, and how they grew up. None of it really affects anything beyond unlocking certain options for appearance or voice, but it's cool for being brought into the universe. After the backstory, you could change appearance with options for hair, eyes, skin, height, scars, tattoos, all that stuff. The only part that left me wanting was the tattoo situation, which was specific combinations as opposed to individual ones with the freedom to arrange and resize, which is really the best way to implement ink in any video game. After appearance comes the most important part of customization, the personality. Each class has 3 options that change how your character reacts to the other players in your squad and everything around you. The 4 characters will shoot the shit during missions, and all of the personality combinations lead to really funny interactions. My favorite voice was the loner played by Greg Jones, which had a sadistic space German thing going on that not only had the best lines, if a smidge heretical, he also reminded me of a great character, long forgotten in the eyes of Capcom. As of release, there are 4 classes, each with access to different weapons, talents, and ultimates. Ogrins, big, tanky bruisers who could crowd control in their sleep, and when they sleep, make great big spoons, I'm assuming. Veterans, thriving in long-range combat with crazy high damage if they're precise enough. Zealots, the closest one to a jack of all trades, versatile enough for both large groups of enemies and single targets with an emphasis on toughness. And lastly, my main, Psyker, which I'll use to go into more depth. Defined by their relationship with the warp, Psykers can tap into it, locking on individual enemies, dealing big damage and popping heads after charging it up. With every enemy killed that way, you gain a warp charge, which gives you a 4% damage buff that stacks if your kills are kept at a high enough clip. However, every time you use the warp with either your mind or force weapons, you gain peril. Reach max peril and you go the way of Toma Bango there. You blow up. It goes away quickly when actively suppressing it, slowly when you don't partake in any warp shit, and gets cut by 50% with your ultimate. The warp is a powerful, unlimited resource, but also one that requires a bit of restraint, making for a fun balancing act, especially with the different builds you can make through the talent system. Like this one that revolves around popping the most heads while staying defensive. You can store up to 6 warp charges instead of 4, with every charge gaining 6% peril resistance, 30% toughness over 5 seconds, between 10 to 33% reduction in range damage taken, and after using your ultimate, for 10 seconds brain bursts are now 25% faster and use 50% less peril. Brain bursts that don't kill also make enemies take 15% more damage from any non-warp attack, which is great for high health targets. But if you'd rather use the warp through staffs and swords because brain burst kinda falls off at higher difficulties, in fact it kinda blows compared to the easy damage veterans have access to, please buff him, you could go with this. Pair 5 to 15% damage buff with force weapons based on peril level, with the change that blocking an attack gains peril instead of losing stamina, every kill replenishes 10% toughness, every attack has a 10% chance to brain burst, and your ultimate now sets enemy souls ablaze. Now I know that's a lot to soak in, especially with the class specific stuff like Soul Blaze or Force Weapons, but none of the game's keywords are super complicated. Like Soul Blaze is just fire. The basics for every character are health, wounds, corruption, toughness, and coherency. Your health bar is segmented into chunks which represent how many wounds you have. Each wound allows you to get down with the possibility of revival before you just die. Corruption reduces your max HP threshold after getting downed, picking up grimoires, or taking a lot of damage from certain enemies. On top of health is your toughness, which is what gets affected first when taking damage. It regens after not being attacked after a while and when killing enemies through melee. It allows for mistakes and Leroy Jenkining your way across Tertium if you can manage the hordes well enough. Lastly, coherency is just a buff that's applied to teammates if you stand together close enough. Staying together is definitely what you should be doing most of the time, but don't be afraid to stray away from your bullet sponge Ogren every now and then. Sometimes it can be beneficial to get a better position for your weapon, an objective, or just take the heat off someone else. Just be wary of the sniper trying to line up a shot. The game has official names for these enemy types, but I have my own stupid terminology, so let's go with that. There's your Unga Bungas, the melee ones that'll rush you down, sometimes at a brisk walk, mostly sprinting, ranging from weak zombies to armored rangers. Then there's the Troopers, basic enemies with different but not super damaging ranged weapons like rifles, shotguns, and lasguns. The only one who has something outside the box are the Shooters, whose bayonets will have your intestines out if you can't sidestep. Next up are the Annoyances, each one makes your life harder but in different ways. Flamers, Bombers, and Snipers are all about area denial through patches of fire or sightlines, while Chargers and Poxbursters harass by moving players around. Lastly, the Checks, made up of Trappers and Hounds. If you get hit by either without a teammate nearby, might as well put down the controller, you're done. Having it so it's mostly Unga Bungas with other stronger types peppered in, or sometimes poured in by the gallon, makes for a great time. Pair that with the levels which are all designed and paced well, it's even better. It's structured to where there's zones, and within them are different missions and objective types, and potential secondaries or modifiers thrown in. In one you'll be going through a train station to assassinate a captain, in another you'll be destroying a pathogen being developed in a freight port, and sometimes you'll need to activate the cooling system at a metal fab facility with suspiciously plague ogren-shaped walls. The secondary objectives could be more interesting. There's 2 of them, but they're both just finding books. The dog multiplier can suck the Emperor's Warhammer, and the scanning missions aren't bad, but are my least favorite. It's like trying to find studs in your walls while a group of crackheads try to shank you in the ribs. I will say though, when scanning you can always hear where the goons are coming from. The sound design is so solid and consistent, I've got certain sound cues ingrained in my soul. Every weapon sounds good, but the melee ones specifically are like music to my ears. I love the meaty thwacks of hammers, and especially the tearing chainswords due to metal or skin. The tracks can be a mix of grandiose organs with industrial, synth, and noise rock. It never gets to the callous-tearing tempo of a Mick Gordon joint, but a lot of the heavier stuff has that sort of march to it. I love the chanting on Disposal Unit, and Nightsider's beeps and boops make for an annoyingly catchy earworm. It's not always in your face though. There's plenty of times when the music takes a backseat to add some ambience during the downtime on missions, helping the general flow. At its peak, when you're surrounded by a competent team, preferably on a mission with no scanning, and you know your build like the back of your hand from talents to exactly what melee pattern should be used at that very moment, it's incredible. And when you just want to mindlessly serve the Emperor and go into autopilot, forgetting about optimization or any of that stuff, it's still so fun. Consistently funny with its dialogue, levels are pleasant to go through even on repeat playthroughs, it sounds great, it looks great, it plays so smoothly. Darktide fires on its cylinders with such ease, and that's what keeps me coming back to play more, rather than the game's offerings of weekly challenges or grinding for 300 schmibble bobs to bless my weapons or whatever. If we're talking just gameplay, it's great, but when looking beyond that, Darktide is disappointing. It's been disappointing for almost half a year. Even if you can get some good mileage out of what's here, as a live service game, it's a failure. 5 months and the biggest additions were one map and a functioning crafting system, while the reward loop is still based on so much RNG. Even if you play like a god on the hardest difficulty, getting the clothes, guns, and buffs you want is mostly luck. This game really should have been delayed, so I would say wait for Darktide to be better or cheaper. I hope companies realize for the service thing to work, you need to start with something great and then consistently be adding stuff. Not start okay, slowly work your way to a better state, and expect consumers to be grateful. Every game doesn't have to be a service title, by the way. Please don't suck. So that's the video. Thank you for watching, and if you want to see anything in the future, be sure to subscribe here and/or follow me on Twitter for updates. Later.